Hey there, just wanted to tell you a little bit about URLs. It's a really simple concept, but I just wanted to get some terminology under our belt. So in the URL, when you enter a URL into a browser bar, this is the most common place that we're seeing URLs. It has a few components, and those components will define what happens when a request is sent to the server. So here we have a URL that's on Wikipedia for the page about URLs, and you'll see that there is a scheme. So the first part of the URL is the scheme, so that's HTTPS. The second part is this colon followed by // and then you can optionally have user info, meaning you can have like your login and password for basic authentication, followed by an @sign. So this part of the URL is optional, so you might just have the // and then the host. That's like the most common thing that we'll see. And these schemes, you might see HTTPS, you might also see FTP or mail. There's a whole bunch of different things that you might see under the scheme. I think there might be a list here. So that's the scheme, and then we have the host. So the host is going to be what we also refer to as the domain. There's kind of some interesting history here that Tim Berners-Lee wished that he, instead of having dots in the domain, had used slashes. So it would have been like org/Wikipedia/en/wiki. Kind of interesting to think about. So the domain is made up of a couple different parts too. So we have this end.org, .com, .io. These are like common top level domains, or TLDs. And then we also have the part that comes before wikipedia.org. So this might be considered the apex. So wikipedia.org might be considered like the apex domain. And then the pieces of the domain that come before that last host and top level domain are called the subdomain. Okay, and then we have a slash. The slash is optional, but implied. So if you don't have a slash there and you're just going directly to like https://en.wikipedia.org, then without the slash, then the slash is sort of implied. And meaning that we're going to go to the root. We want to request the root resource that lives at that slash. Then we generally will have a path. So in this case, the path is /wiki/URL. And then in addition to the path, you might also have a query string or a port. So right here, wikipedia.org, the default port is 80. But if you had a specific port, for HTTP, the default port is 80. And then for HTTPS, the port is 443. So these are going to be sort of inferred for you by the browser, but the port specifies which port at the server you want to the server program is bound to. So you might need to specify the port sometimes when accessing a URL. And a lot of times when you're working with a local server, you'll put like localhost :3000. That's because your local server is bound to port 3000, and that's like the program is that you are writing locally is tied to port 3000. This, when you're working locally, this is generally like a high port number because the lower port numbers are reserved and mostly for like public access. And you typically have to like set up your firewall to allow access through your network to those ports. All right, so then we have the path, and after the path, we might have a query string that starts with a question mark. So here on DuckDuckGo, we have this question mark here that is followed by a query string. The query string is like an ampersand separated set of attribute value pairs. They're not really like key value pairs, they're attribute value pairs, meaning that you can put in sort of like these braces here saying that Q is a list of URLs, or you can say like QX equals URL. That means that like Q is the top level name that is pointing at a dictionary, and in that dictionary there's a key X, and the value for key X is URL. So these are attribute value pairs that follow the query string. So you have the scheme, the domain or host, the path, then the query string, and then after the query string, so let's just put in something here for fun. You'll have this octothorpe, or like the pound sign, and the part of the URL that comes after the pound sign is known as the fragment. Everything before the pound sign is passed to the server, and it kind of acts as arguments into the server. So you can kind of think of this as like wiki URL is a function that we're calling, and we're passing in the argument named q with the value fun. So that's kind of the way that I like to think about the mental model around the URL that happens before the fragment, and then generally the part after the fragment is used to access a part of the page. Recent, like in some modern web frameworks, you might use this to like navigate around to different parts of the page, but it also is used often to like jump to a specific part of the page. So here, if we click on this one, right, this one, if you look down at the bottom of the URL bar, you'll see that it is pointing to the fragment that is like the citation note with a footnote ID. So if we click on that, we're going to actually be on the same page. The page did not make a full page refresh, but we just navigated to a different part of the page. And so that's this link here is anchoring with that ID, and so we're jumping down to this specific link on the page. That's how you might use like a table of contents or some really basic old school page navigation. You'll see this in like Google Docs a lot, where you'll have a table of contents, and then you when you're deep linking or like drilling down to a specific header, you'll be navigating through the document with these the stuff that's in the fragment. Now also recently, the HTML5 push API allows us to modify the URL just on the client and continue to use the forward and back arrow to build like nice fancy single page applications where you don't really see a fragment. So the fragment is kind of like an older way of navigating around, but now that we have these really rich front-end applications from like Angular, Ember, React, whatever, you might end up using the HTML5 like push API to update that URL, so that when you send a link, like the point is that when you send someone a link, you copy and paste this link and you send it to them, or the URL, you send it to them, they should be able to jump to the specific resource on the page pretty quickly. So hopefully that was helpful. This will be, I hope this is a good reference material. Remember that everyone starts somewhere. So cheers.